Welcome to Contagious Thinking with Thomas Verstraeten, a podcast from P95. This is where global health gets personal and where data, science, and insight come to life. Let's get the show started.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Contagious Thinking, a podcast about the global state of infectious disease as we see it at P95. Today we are recording our very first episode, and as we are approaching our 14th birthday, this episode is actually going to be about how we did at P95 and what we learned along the way. My name is Tom Verstraeten. I am the founder and CEO of P95, and I will be hosting this podcast. So for the first episode, who better to invite than our very first employee, and that is Margarita Riera. Welcome, Marga.
Thank you, Tom.
It's been how many years since you joined P95?
Let me count. So 12 years. Yeah.
12 years and counting since you joined us. Marga, before joining P95, you're a physician. You were working in Africa for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. You were active in the public health arena for quite a while. What made you decide to join P95?
I would say it's a bit of serendipity for a part, a bit of conscious decision. So at that time, after I finished or completed my last a project that I was working on in Africa, I really wanted to go back home for some time to Spain, to Mallorca. And then at that time, I basically, the options to work in epidemiology in Mallorca, basically there's not that many companies or in epidemiology established there. So I was really looking for something that I could do, if possible, remotely for some time while I decided what I wanted to do. And then I saw this ad for epidemiologists for P95 remote, which really fit really well. And then what really made me decide to take the position basically was you. Meeting you, your profile, and I thought, oh, this is going to be somewhat really interesting to work with.
Okay, thanks for that. You didn't have to make compliments in the podcast.
That is the truth. I mean, it was what made me decide, oh, so this could be actually very interesting. And initially when I joined, I really thought that, well, maybe I will just do this for some time.
Some time became 12 years in the
Yeah,
meanwhile.
sometime.
Yes. But I think you highlighted some very important elements there, Marga. First of all, the opportunity to work remotely, that's always been important to us, and I think has now been recognized as a very important way of enabling people to work from wherever they are. That's not just the case for P95, that's the case for many people, I think, who work in our sector. But the other important part was that you wanted to continue your work in the public health space and in the control of infectious disease, and that you noted that there was not really that many different opportunities. And this is where P95 kind of came in, and I believe filled the void. But let me not answer all the questions for you. So, we've been on this journey now for more than 12 years with you, and for more than 14 years almost as P95. We have gone a long way, right? We started just the two of us. We are now close to 300 people at P95. A lot has changed, a lot we have learned. How would you see the most important things that have changed and that we have learned in this long journey we have undertaken together?
So it's been very interesting times now because we grew initially not that fast and then very fast as from 2019 to 2020. So for me, it was a learning experience in the sense that, I started not managing anyone. I ended up managing a lot of people at some point in the company. And the importance to keep, everybody aligned. And for me, it was important that we keep the spirit of P95, and no matter how big that we get. And that's been, I wouldn't say it's difficult to do, but you need to really consciously do it, so that people, as they join, that they learn what P95 is about. And we keep that spirit.
I was going to ask, you talk about the spirit of P95. That's something that we often mention. Could you try and describe that? And how would that be different from the spirit of a public health agency or a pharmaceutical company or Médecins Sans Frontières?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know if it would be completely different from some of those other options that you have, but for me, it's for on one side the passion for what we are doing, and then very linked to respectful environment and a very open environment where people really can express themselves and no one is basically afraid of, oh no, I can say this because the boss is in front of me. So basically to try to keep a very open environment, and that depends. I think you can also find it, I mean, in the pharma industry or in public health or MSF, but it depends a lot on the leadership, right? So basically it's something that has to come from the leadership. So if you don't have it in the leadership, then you won't find that openness. You might still find the passion.
And now that we have become more of a typical organization with different layers of management, do you feel we have managed to maintain that spirit, or have we lost some of it? Or how have we managed to balance getting properly organized with maintaining a spirit of openness and transparency?
I think for the most part, we have achieved that. I mean, for me, the main changes, apart that, of course, there's more and more people, so it's more and more difficult to keep track of everybody or to know who everybody is and what they are doing in the company. So that requires a bit more conscious effort now, so to keep track of of everything. But for me, the main change probably is that, of course, there's more bureaucracy, so to speak, which is okay. I mean, as a company grows, I mean, you need some structure and some things that need to be done in the same way, both when we're talking about, of course, SOPs and for studies, but just in general for the functioning of the company. But we need to be careful that it doesn't become too much.
Yes. So that is looking inward within P95, what may have changed. If we look to the outside, the world of infectious disease control and the different stakeholders that are out there, one thing that for me, I have really learned over these years is, first of all, there was a need for groups like us. When we started, I remember when I hired you, I was very nervous, not because of you, but because of the responsibility of offering you a contract and telling you, Marga, I'm going to hire you indefinitely and I'm going to make sure you will have work. And I wasn't really sure at that moment, but that was the intention. That turned out to be very easy, actually, to make sure that you had enough work to a degree that we very soon had to hire more people, right? But that's, to me, an obvious learning. There was a gap out there for a kind of a CRO like us to support all the stakeholders in doing their non-interventional work, right? Whether they were public health agencies or like WHO or the CDC, or whether they were pharmaceutical companies or academic institutions. Many of them told us they really needed help, and we managed to provide them the help. And also, to a large degree, we managed to help them work together, right? And maybe we can talk a little bit about that, the public-private partnerships in which we played a key role that helped us grow to a large degree. But I think that also made us understand the importance of having, the private sector, primarily the pharmaceutical companies, work together with public health agencies in trying to control infectious disease and trying to assess the effect of the vaccines that have been developed. Let's maybe talk about that for a second, the different partnerships that we were involved in and how that has evolved over time.
Yeah, because I think the first project we got involved was advanced for IMI. I was not directly involved.
Maybe we have to clarify for our listeners when we mention IMI. IMI is the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which now has been replaced by, I think, what's called IHI. That is a collaboration between the European Commission and the pharma industry in Europe, which provides funding to set up consortia to work on particular concerns, challenges that have been identified across both public and private partnerships. So indeed, Advanced was the first one in which we were involved, which was looking at how to assess the benefit and risk of vaccination in Europe using both the capacity of the pharma industry and the public health sector, and also the knowledge and the expertise from both sides. So typically, these consortia would involve players from vaccine manufacturers, but from several agencies, as well as small, medium enterprises like ourselves, and academic institutions. So we started with Advance. We then moved on to Drive, right, which was really looking at specifically at flu vaccination and how to assess that. And then came the pandemic, right? 2019, 2020, and we managed to transform this flu effectiveness monitoring system into a COVID vaccine effectiveness monitoring system. And that became the origin of a strong network across Europe with hospitals in all major countries where we managed to monitor the effectiveness of first COVID vaccines and later other vaccines such as RSV vaccine, pneumococcal vaccines, flu vaccines, etc. And all that was done through public-private partnerships. Marga, you were not involved in Advance by itself, but I'm sure you've been also working across public-private partnerships.
Yeah, no, I was very involved in Drive, particularly the first half of the project. Now, since all these projects run for 5 years, so I was very involved the first 2 or 3 years of the project. So in that one, we were leading one of the work packages, which was the one mostly focusing basically on the analysis and reporting of the data every year. So I think that project was very successful, no, because that project was born, or IMI set this up because of a requirement of EMA on whether they wanted to require brand specific influenza vaccine effectiveness from vaccine manufacturers, and it was not clear whether you could actually obtain that data or even that you would have enough data to estimate vaccine effectiveness. So I think it was a very successful collaboration between the industry. There were several academic and public health partners involved, and then ourselves, and we managed to set up a network across Europe of hospitals, but also some primary healthcare centers across different countries, which allowed to estimate a specific influenza vaccine effectiveness, at least for some brands, because the problem, of course, that we run into is that some brands, of course, that were not that used, so the sample size would not be enough to calculate that, or even sometimes in certain age groups. One of the things we learned during that project was how difficult sometimes it is to know who is going to be using which vaccine, when, and how much. Which you would think that should be an information that is easy to obtain, and it was not that straightforward. So that made the planning a bit challenging. But overall, it was a very successful project, and that's why I think also then when the pandemic arrived, it was quite easy to basically turn that with the public partners into COVID Drive and repurpose the network to do COVID vaccine effectiveness.
The same work for COVID vaccines.
Yes.
Of course, one of the reasons why there was a difficulty for these public and private partners to work together was some kind of hesitation on conflicts of interest, on sharing of data with the industry. How did you go about that? How in Drive, how did you manage to resolve, or at least to convince the different partners that it was okay to share data between different commercial entities and also between the commercial sector and the public sector?
But I think part of it was that basically we were acting a bit as the buffer between the public partners and the pharma industry.
Like a trusted third party sort of setting?
Yes, so like a trusted third party, and that basically we were managing the data and then also managing the data analysis and reporting. So I think that was one important aspect. And then the other one was that we had an independent scientific committee that was also overseeing all the activities of the consortium, just to basically and reviewing all from the protocols to the reports every season, to also try to guarantee that indeed basically everything was being done as it should.
If I recall well, quite a bit of work also went into developing what was called a governance charter.
Yes.
That was kind of spelled out the rules of the engagement between the different parties.
Yeah, correct. So there was that took quite some work. But there was the governance, and part of this governance was, of course, the establishment of the independent scientific committee. That continues to be the case moving into then COVID Drive, and currently its evolution into ID Drive. So that continues to be the case, so that there is a governance charter and an independent scientific committee.
Well, that all happened in Europe. The podcast is supposed to look at the global state of infectious disease, and we also have, in the meanwhile, developed operations in many different other regions of the world. Have we managed to, let's say, export, if I can call it like that, this idea, this concept of collaborating between public and private partners to other parts of the world?
I mean, we have certainly been doing studies with public partners in other areas, but I don't think it has developed yet as what we have done in Europe. But hopefully now, into the future, we can establish similar networks in other continents.
Well, let's maybe look for a second at Latin America, right? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, we realized a lot of the vaccine development was also taking place in Latin America. And so we set up our own operational hub in Colombia at the time. And immediately we were asked to do a number of studies, one with a private client, the other one with a public client. Did you feel that this kind of hesitancy of collaborating between public and private partners was as present in Latin America as it was in Europe, or was it more straightforward?
I don't remember that it was particularly challenging. I think the hesitation, particularly of the public partners in Latin America, is less than it is in Europe, particularly in some countries in Europe. So I don't remember it as being particularly challenging, that aspect of of these studies.
I would tend to agree with you. Again, I also was not personally involved, but I remember when we set up these studies or envisioned how to do these studies of COVID vaccine effectiveness in Latin America, that the willingness of the public health partners in that part of the world maybe was higher, and that there was less hesitancy to do that. Meanwhile, we have also developed quite some work in Africa. Right, we're also now doing both epidemiological and clinical studies in Africa. We have also been involved in some of the work around the Lassa fever in Africa. For you, I guess you were active in Africa before. I'm not sure if you were personally involved in all these projects, but I'm sure from within your function you have seen what was going on there. How do you see things developing there? How has that worked for us to collaborate in Africa with the different stakeholders in infectious disease control?
Yeah, I think it has worked well because I think the first project that we did as P95 in Africa was one that was for WHO that included 3 countries. It was not only in Africa; it also included the sites in Asia, which was really interesting because of the interaction, of course, with the sites that were involved, that were all public hospitals, but then also because we were very involved with the national regulatory authorities, participating or overseeing also the study. So I think it was a very interesting collaboration. And then moving forward to other studies that have come after that, I mean, I think it's working very well. No, of course, for the part of clinical trials, it was instrumental that we merged with OnQ in South Africa, so that also has allowed us to grow the site network in Africa. And I think currently for all the studies that are ongoing, it's working really well, so that the relationship both with sites and with the authorities it's very good, and the studies are really working very well.
And I think for all of us, that's an extremely encouraging development. The possibilities of doing these bigger cross-country international studies across the entire continent is really a very exciting development that we're very happy to be part of. Marga, we've talked quite a bit about epidemiology and how we found a role for us to help different stakeholders improve their epidemiological activities, call them real world evidence, call them primary data collection studies. Meanwhile, P95 has also developed to offer clinical trial services to our clients. Let's talk a little bit about let's say, how these two work together. It's maybe a little bit odd for a CRO to develop from a non-interventional focus to an interventional focus. I think most CROs, the large CROs, usually develop the other way around. They start as clinical CROs and at some point say, we will also offer non-interventional trial activities to our clients. We have kind of done the opposite. We've started from offering primarily non-interventional trial support and now are also offering interventional or clinical trial support to our clients. How do those two fit together? Are they two separate activities, or do they somehow go hand in hand?
For me, it goes hand in hand, right? So there's a role for epidemiology during the whole cycle of vaccine, well, of drug in general, but vaccines is what we focus on for vaccine development. Also from the epidemiology at the very beginning of clinical development to help define target populations, to help also guide the choice of the sites where the phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials are going to be done, moving all the way over to post-licensure, basically following all vaccine effectiveness, vaccine safety studies and registry. So there is a continuum of the epidemiology part underpinning, if I can say so, underpinning the clinical development and the clinical trial. So for me, I don't see it as yeah, they have of course some particularities methodologically, obviously, but I see it more as a continuum of the clinical development, so that both basically need to work together and complement each other.
One big question that often comes up is related to the processes surrounding these different activities. So we have a very quite rigid quality management system, let's say, around clinical trials, which is driven by very well recognized international standards called good clinical practices. We don't really have that for epidemiology. How do we go about that? How do we manage to tell our people these are the standards you have to do for clinical trials, these are the standards you have to do for epidemiological standards? Are they different, or do we use the same standards? How have we managed that?
There has been a lot of discussion over the years, since the problem that we find even before we have a fully developed QMS is that sometimes our clients will come with the mindset of coming from clinical trials and not having done non-interventional studies before, and they will bring the same mindset in terms of quality and GCP, where for epidemiology, basically those requirements can be quite a bit lower without compromising, of course, the integrity of the research. So it has been a struggle sometimes, and educating the clients actually in why we don't need that degree of monitoring that is normally, for example, expected in a clinical trial. And then basically what we ended up doing once we developed more fully our own QMS was now defining our own level, basically, of quality standards, as in classifying basically the different types of projects, whether they involve primary data collection or not, or is secondary data use, whether it's studies that are going to be used for regulatory purposes or not. And basically we did a bit our own classification of what standards apply to each of those levels to maintain basically the quality of the research.
So is it fair to say that there is still a gap out there, let's say, with regards to international standards for non-interventional trials, and how these do or do not differ from the standards for interventional or clinical trials? But I would agree with you, we've managed, at least to ourselves, to set our own standards. These, of course, have been challenged by outsiders, by our clients, but so far I think we have managed well to justify our approach to this, and we've found a little bit of a balance. I don't think it's completely perfect, but it works for us, and we are certainly very happy and willing to work with other stakeholders to try and improve those standards to make sure they're kind of acceptable and clear to everybody, so that we don't have to explain over and over again the difference between a clinical trial and a non-interventional trial whenever we start setting those up. That's great. Marga, we've talked about different areas in the world. We've talked about Europe, we've talked about Latin America, we talked about Africa. It's very difficult nowadays to talk about public health and infectious disease control and vaccines without mentioning what's going on in North America. Everybody follows the news will know that there's a lot of pressure on the structures that have existed before in North America in infectious disease control, be it NIH, be it FDA, be it CDC. How has P95 navigated in this landscape? Has this affected P95? How have we had to change our course? What's our position here?
I think our position has been that we continue basically with clients that are based in the US. So far, I don't think we have been really affected by it. What we are seeing is a bit that in the end it might be in our advantage, that some potential clients are maybe some of them, given the uncertainty in the US, shifting a bit their focus, that maybe they were very focused initially in obtaining the marketing authorization for the US, and then they are shifting like, oh, well, maybe the European one might be more priority. And then, of course, we are well positioned to help for that, since we are based our experience in Europe. So I think that's what we may be seeing. And then, yeah, I think it's still to be seen how much it will affect us. So it's not very clear. It's only that there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment.
Yeah, it is. It is probably extremely difficult to really find concrete changes or to show what has actually concretely happened. But it is true that we have felt maybe an increased willingness for some of our clients to come and do their studies in Europe, where there might be more certainty about the vaccination programs. But at the same time, we continue with our activities in North America or in other parts of the world, and have a kind of a waiting attitude. Let's say we know we need to follow what's going on closely to not be caught by surprise. But at this stage, it hasn't really fundamentally changed our focus, and we believe that infectious disease control is going to be needed no matter what happens at the political level, and that the need for stakeholders to work together is probably higher than ever before. So if we can play a role on that as a trusted third party, or as an intermediate between some of the stakeholders, we will certainly continue to do that. Marga, we are probably nearing the end of this podcast. We don't want to go on for too long. Last words from your end, looking back at the last 12 years, any major learnings you would like to share with our listeners at this time?
I think my main learning is that there are many different ways, or many different solutions of how to go around a particular problem from the client, so that they need to be. And it's one of the things certainly that I have enjoyed during my time at P95, of trying to be creative on helping our clients to get the data or implement the study that they needed, and basically getting familiar and knowing all the possible data sources. I mean, from, of course, all the databases or EMR that might be out there, but also still the importance sometimes of primary data collection, because I think we all think that there's more data out there than there actually is.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. And that's actually, I can only subscribe that. Also for myself, I have to say, when we started out, we really thought that epidemiology or real world evidence was moving away from primary data collection to secondary data analysis, to analyzing these large linked databases, as they are sometimes called. And that we have learned that, yes, there is a lot of information in there, but there is also a lot of missing information in there. And that oftentimes the best way is to go back to actually good old primary data collection, good old epidemiological methods, to make sure you get that specific information that you need. Maybe the ideal situation is when you can combine both, right? If you can get some of the information from pre-existing databases and supplement that with other, maybe more qualitative information that might not be available in a preset or electronic format, that might be the best of both worlds. But actually, we do find ourselves still doing a lot of primary data collection. And that's where probably the epidemiology and clinical studies also start approaching each other, because it's the same protocol development, it's the same investigator search and networking that has to happen, the same kind of contracting, the same kind of monitoring even for many of these studies, where we see that distinction between non-interventional and interventional actually becomes quite vague, if you wish, with only the absence of the intervention being the main difference. But the way you run these studies has been very similar. And that is certainly where we have learned a lot and gained a lot of experience in how to do that. All right. Well, thanks, Marga. It's been a pleasure to have you on this podcast. Thanks for sharing your insights and your thoughts. And we look forward to continuing the good work.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Contagious Thinking, a podcast from P95. You can find us in all major streaming platforms. Join us next time for more conversations that move public health forward.